Hi, everyone. Really grateful that you're here today. We've got some of the industry's foremost experts on retail. We're going to be talking about how to stand out in a crowded marketplace and how to devise strategies that will help to differentiate you within your customers. So I'm Claire Kaufman. I work for a company in Portland, Oregon called Groundworks Industries. We own and operate Sarah and Electric Lettuce dispensaries and also pharma. And we also run Proof Cultivar. I used to work with BDS Analytics for a number of years as their Northwest Regional Director, and I actually worked with Steve D'Angelo for 2 years as his head sales analyst before that. So I'm going to let everybody quickly introduce themselves, and then I want to get to the questions because that's why everyone's here.
Hello, I am Jared Mirsky, CEO and founder of Wick and Mortar. We are a cannabis-focused branding and marketing agency based out of Seattle. We've been around for 10 years, long time. So we've had the ability to see where cannabis has gone since its inception. I speak at about 20 to 30 conferences a year, so I'm not new to this, so feel free to ask me any questions after if there isn't anything that we covered today. But ultimately, I'm glad to be here, and hopefully I can share some amazing insight with you all.
So my name is Adam.
No, you got to turn it up. Yeah, there.
Hello. There we go. We're good.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Adam Shadletsky. I speak at around one conference per year, so make sure not to ask me too many questions afterwards. But I deal with business development and partnerships for Haiku Brands. Haiku Brands is a premium cannabis brand house that has 4 unique brands, and we're also building out our retail distribution network in Canada. A month ago or so, we were wholly acquired by Canopy Growth. So now we are working with them on their entire retail operation in Canada.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Marty Higgins. I am the CEO and founder of the Harvest branded dispensaries here in San Francisco, well, the Bay Area. We have 2 stores, one in the Mission District and one in the Richmond District. Both of those have on-site consumption as well. I look forward to the panel and any questions afterwards.
Hey guys, my name is Claudio Miranda, and I'm the Executive Director of Guild Enterprises. We oversee a family of cannabis brands that ranges from Guild Extracts is probably the one we're most known for, that focuses on the concentrates market. We also have Guild Cannabis, which is a flower brand, pre-rolled joints. And we have a Guild flagship store, dispensary, one of the 16 licensed dispensaries in San Jose. And we also have some affiliated farms in Monterey County. So we're a vertically integrated brand family that kind of touches most of the key segments of the value chain. Thanks.
Wonderful. So I'm really excited to get to the reason why we're here. And the questions are going to, some of them will seem sort of basic, and some of them are more in-depth. So the first question I want to start with, it sounds so obvious in any other industry, but in this industry, it's a little bit of a head-scratcher. So oftentimes, retail outlets or dispensaries, they cater to different demographics, but how do you even determine who those buyer demographics or who those buyer personas are? Because sometimes your most vocal customers aren't actually the most aggressive growing segments of the market. So how do you identify your target audience? And then how do you segment your product assortment and merchandise your space accordingly for those groups? Let's start with Marty, since you are right here in the city.
You know, for us, that process started as we were conceiving the Harvest concept and the business and who we felt were the psychographic and demographic that we wanted to target. And for us, that was baby boomers and females. And so, it first dictated a product line that, say, for an edibles at the time, what was in vogue was very high milligram, not easily titratable products. And I shifted that, where we brought in lower dose edibles, which you see as commonplace today. But 3 years ago, it was certainly not the norm. And easily titratable edibles, because our thought process was to help educate, help people start slow, learn how cannabinoids interact with their bodies, and win lifelong customers as a result. as far as the store setup, it is more about, I would say, product classifications, and the sales volume of those classifications dictate the size and placement of the products in our stores. But more of a focus on the overall customer journey and pathway than necessarily a specific segment as far as merchandising is concerned. And so all that said, we pay close attention to data analytics, and we watch the shifting patterns where we had the medicinal market and now switching to the adult use. We've seen shifts and changes in nearly all of our segments. Today, a third of our business is made up by seniors, boomers, and if we add women in there, specific not to those other classifications, it's roughly 40% of our business, and that's our philosophy.
Would you say that there's any? I'm just kind of taking over until we can find a way to quiet them down next door to us. But when it comes to I guess segmenting the people that you market to, is there anything that you would say you do differently within your store to differentiate the way you communicate with the various different people that walk in? Because you had mentioned that you have seniors. What was it? 40% you said? Women boomers, right? Would you say that you've got people staffed specifically to communicate with them versus those that may be younger, or because from what I gather, most dispensaries, they'll have those that focus a lot on the rec market in terms of the communication, but also other bud tenders that may also be focused primarily on the medicinal side.
Yes, and so the first step in that is trying to have a diverse base of cannabis consultants working on the floor. We've got seniors working on the floor. So if a senior comes in, they're likely going to go and gravitate to some of the more mature consultants on the floor. Short of that, in terms of communications, whether it's in-store communication with shelf talkers or leaflets and things that they can take away, specific events, educational events. Tali's in the back there that's run our Senior 101, which has been very effective and just great turnout. And so we're certainly catering towards our demographics in that sense, and then pushing out whether it's education, specific products in our newsletters, shelf talkers, and other takeaways that our consultants can help not only engage with the customer on the floor, but then hopefully leave them with something behind or invite them to, say, a Cannabis 101.
Awesome. So this is my next question. So I remember when I was working with BDS Analytics, I would work with all different kinds of brands, and we oftentimes had to tell them, well, your real customers as a brand aren't actually your customers. Your real customers, some might say, are actually bud tenders or wholesale buyers, because in no other industry is there really that broker of a relationship between the product and the customer. And leveraging that relationship and strategically focusing on that relationship is a way that brands can really be successful. And I see a lot of brands just throw swag at bud tenders and say, oh, look, we're making them happy. But I would love to know, because they have such an influence on sell-through at retail, what are some of the innovative strategies you've seen brands utilize in order to engage bud tenders? Okay, Jared, start with you.
I'll take this one. So, a really interesting technique that we've used with respect to the cultivators that we represent, we find that by having really good social presence to start with. So, for example, if I had, let's say, an account with 500,000 followers, right? And let's just say that I purchased this account from perhaps, these. I'll get back to that in a moment. But if I had an Instagram account with, let's say, 500,000 followers, and I walked into a dispensary and I was a cultivator, and I was the one doing a drop-off, and I were to, let's just say, capture all of these bud tenders in my story, or find ways to maybe interview them as I'm doing a drop-off, that would create far more engagement with respect to how the bud tenders integrate themselves with that said brand. The reason why I say that is because what bud tender wouldn't want to be seen on a social media account with 500,000 followers. So when you look at the fact that social media plays an integral role in not only how bud tenders engage in the cannabis industry, but if you notice, a lot of bud tenders are looking to become more of a thought leader or influencer themselves. And so when they have the ability to engage with a brand that has that many followers, it makes it real easy for that said bud tender to then have that cultivator on mind.
Do you do that with hashtags? Because I know a lot of managers of large cannabis social media accounts who would be very apprehensive
Stories.
to do that just
Talking about
through stories.
We're talking about through stories, yeah. So if part of my strategy was to, I have the 500,000 followers. Let's say part of my strategy was to, go to this dispensary and then film all of the bud tenders through this story feed and maybe tag some of them. That would then encourage those bud tenders to want to sell more of my product because they get to be seen more times in terms of when I come to the store.
So eco.
Eco.
Good to know.
Yes.
Any other innovative strategies? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that we don't see enough of in the industry, but that's quickly emerging, is just more education.
Yeah.
We often look to the wine industry a lot
Yeah.
for some pointers on how to really bring in that depth of education with regard to brands and products and understanding all the different facets of cannabis, right? I think if you look back a couple years ago, before there was just this proliferation of brands, it was pretty much just looking at products, right? Do you want an edible? Do you want a flower? Do you want a concentrate? And really just trying to guide people toward the specific product that they want to consume. But now that we're seeing this explosion of brands, we got the brand differentiation that's happening, and I think we're going to see increasing layers of story and narrative that come with each brand, and how those brands are targeting their customers with different forms of engagement on the narrative side. Like, are they really looking to them to engage with them for a medicinal use case or a recreational use case? If it's recreational, are they connoisseurs? Are they going after baby boomers or seniors? And what kind of narratives are they building around that to really speak to their customers' needs, their aspirations, their wants? And really, we're starting to now take playbooks out of typical CPG marketing and branding, where again you can bring that type of layered narrative to the customer experience. And so I think educating the bud tenders, and as brands engage the bud tenders more, which are now kind of becoming the sommeliers of our industry, because they're the front lines of influence for the brands in terms of how they're influencing the customer purchasing decisions. So I think it's really important to educate the bud tenders and help them understand what makes your brand different, what's the story behind your brand, and giving them the tools and resources to really tell that story for you.
And I completely agree with that, Claudio. In fact, just to add on to that, some of the things that we've done too to help create brands as a way of positioning them to be a bit more authoritative. Unfortunately, not a lot of consumers are doing a ton of research online prior to walking into a dispensary. So it is the dispensary's responsibility, as well as the brand themselves, the product themselves rather, to be providing that education. Unfortunately, not enough retailers do that. Leafly did a great job of that during the inception of the cannabis industry, at least when I was in Washington State. Unfortunately, not a lot of companies are doing that. In fact, I think if I were to be really strategic, if I were a cultivator looking to develop a relationship with a retailer, I would co-brand that marketing piece with the retailer so that I'm not only providing my level of social responsibility, but so is the dispensary. And so it creates a much stronger relationship there.
Yeah, and I can build on the education piece a little bit. Definitely building a relationship with bud tenders in person wherever possible. We found to be really effective. So, we try and go into pretty much every retailer that we want to have a relationship with, have one-on-ones, small group sessions with bud tenders, and provide both digital and physical assets for them to have to be able to display beside the products. That obviously depends on the bandwidth of your organization to be able to do that, but we found that to be really effective.
Well, I guess I have a question. I mean, I can't overstate the importance of the bud tender relationship. And sometimes I think that they're incentivized, yes, by social media, or yes, through building a relationship. But are there any specific tactics that you've seen brands use? Like, I mean, even, okay, so in Portland, there is a cultivator that gives away Blazers tickets to whatever budtender sells the most product. I'm talking about, like, are there actual tangible takeaways that if there are people here, they can help motivate and accelerate the sell-through of their products at retail?
Yeah, I mean, there was a brand that I worked with in Seattle who their sales gal, she decided to start a thing called Terp School. I thought it was really clever because so many bud tenders have no idea what terpene profiles are. In fact, they still sell based on potency and indica sativa hybrid, which I think we've all realized is not
that's my next question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll let you get to that. But she started a terp school nonetheless, and the schooling was held at their facility. And so essentially, what they did is just gave bud tenders consumer education, and gave them a little badge of honor, so to speak, for passing the course, if you will. So there are ways that you can create a relationship with your bud tender through forms of education that make sure that that brand themselves remain the authority and always on mind, or always in the minds of those bud tenders.
Next question is about, so I'm going to skip ahead to this question I have about indica and sativa because you just mentioned it. So it's a little bit complicated, but for anyone who's in here, there's this real siloing effect happening between what customers actually seem to want, which is we're seeing the growth and the emergence of dosable products and the growth and the emergence of CBD and lower potency products. But we see the wholesalers actually still valuing product based on THC and indica and sativa. And scientifically, a lot of us know that this was really only meant to ever apply to the morphology of a plant, never to the actual effect of a plant. So my question is, there are so many brands that still sell products this way, and not because they don't know it's not true, but because they feel they have to in order to cater to the market. And I mean, up in Oregon, I know we have a problem with labs that fabricate results to get higher THC results. And so my question specifically is, do we as retailers and brands, do we have any culpability in this dynamic? And if so, how do we remedy it? Okay, do you want to go first,
Sure.
Adam?
So yeah, we take a bit of a different approach. Our perspective at this point is that both, it's rare to find a true 100% sativa or indica plant. Plus, it doesn't mean all that much to individuals, to our consumers. So we break it down into 5 categories. So we talk about, indica or sativa dominant, indica or sativa leaning, and then CBD dominant. And we also make sure when we're talking to people that we're not focused on, if you get sativa dominant, here's how you will feel, because it does affect every individual differently. We want people to understand that and not think as long as they pick that one of 5 categories, you're going to get exactly the experience that they want. Instead, we talk more about, especially for new consumers, the ratio of THC to CBD. So, we're probably not going to recommend to somebody who's relatively new 22% THC, 0% CBD. We're going to recommend they look at more of a 1-to-1 ratio or 1-to-2 ratio THC to CBD to get them started, have a good experience first, see how their body reacts to it, and kind of prevent that one really bad experience from kind of coloring their perspective on cannabis use as a whole.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you, Adam, on that we look at those classes as a sativa or sativa leaning. And we use them as guidelines, not as gospel, if you will, because they can be misleading. But, the other side of that coin is that, seeing some of the new, flower manufacturers and producers delivering a product that says energize, and then in that it could be Jack Herer or it could be green crack, completely different effects as I would interpret it, but also recognizing the importance that the cannabinoids impact us all individually, and that we're using these as guidelines to come back and say, tell us how you felt. And so I do see that there are some issues in lumping sativa, indica, and hybrids into these names of feelings and effect. And
I would agree. It also seems like a liability on some level, because at some point there is going to be the consumer expectation of A delivering, B effect. And if that doesn't deliver, then in other segments, you're accountable for that.
Well, there's actually a company called Melix that provides a DNA test kit that allows you to test your genetic makeup against, or allows you to test your genetic markers against terpene profiles to determine what makes the most sense based on your DNA.
Oh,
So
that's compelling.
that's pretty cool. But what I was going to say too is that one of the things that people don't realize is that most people overconsume. It's in our nature when sharing a joint to smoke the entire thing until it's done. So you don't realize that you're actually over-consuming. And so what happens naturally is cannabis then turns into a sedative, and so ultimately you're not really feeling the effects that were described on the package. We were working with this brand called Coast, and they had a low-potency product, but wanted to find a way to move consumers off of cigarettes and into cannabis. So we thought by creating a low-potency cigarette, it looked like a cigarette, had a filter like a cigarette. What we were able to do is create a parallel experience to that of smoking one. And so by emulating that, people looked at that and felt, well, that's weed. That doesn't look so bad. So the goal here or there was to help shift the perception of not only why people get scared to smoke in the first place, but moving them to something that is a lot more safe.
Did you want to
One last thing to add to that. I mean, I think that as we see the recreational market get further established and cannabis is going more mainstream, we're going to see a new language surrounding the consumption of cannabis. And I think that when we look at terms like indica and sativa, they become they're more industry terms. They're more industry insider terms. It's for people that really maybe are more on the more technical side of the product. And even there, I recognize that it's losing its validity. But I think like the wine industry, again, to use as an example, if you talk to winemakers, they'll analyze wine in terms of its analytes and its complex carbon chains and its aldehydic and it's a chemistry vernacular that they use in describing wine. But then if they're talking to their consumers, they have a completely different language in terms of how they describe their wine, and it's not just the wine itself in terms of is it fruity or is it tart or is it tannic. But there again, they're adding the layers of the narrative in terms of the vineyard, the vintage, the family that's behind that, the provenance of the wine. And I think that those additional layers that are going to be added to cannabis and the cannabis language that's emerging, I think is going to be what we're going to see the emphasis on. So we're going to move a little bit, not away from the descriptors of the plant itself, but adding those layers of provenance and appellation and storytelling around the product that will create a richer kind of dialogue and language for us to more effectively engage and communicate with our customers.
I would say the complicated thing too is that there's no packaging system. There's no global packaging system. When you look at coffee and wine and beer, milk, they all have the same system that spans across each brand.
Right.
But
we don't even have SKUs.
yeah, but in cannabis, it's so complex because it caters to both medicinal and recreational that there haven't been packaging systems established yet. And so, like you were saying, as far as those appellations go, I completely and totally agree. That's going to be a great way to layer and create, far more awareness with respect to the story and perhaps where the product is grown.
I think also it's really about consumer control. When you see consumers latching onto indica and sativa, they're latching onto that because that's an expression, their expression of control over their experience, and not necessarily because that has to be that manifestation of that explanation. So my question next is, actually I'm going to go to you, Adam. I don't know how many retailers, operators we have in the audience, but I'd like to learn a little bit. I know that Tokyo Smoke is actively expanding, and I'm really interested to understand how you keep your merchandising and your customer experience consistent and fresh as you expand across multiple locations.
Sure. So I think, the first, second, and third most important things are the team that you have. It's not easy to create a compelling store design and store layout and aesthetic and then figure out, what the right way is to position all the different, cannabis products for cannabis accessories, how to merchandise everything properly with the right aesthetic, how to train what we call education specialists rather than bud tenders, to have a really thoughtful, engaging, empowering experience for consumers, and have that playbook that can then be applied, across multiple jurisdictions. And, it takes a lot of passion. I see the long hours that my colleagues put in, making sure that take-home journal is just going to be absolutely perfect, exactly what the consumer wants. So I think having passionate kind of central team members that also are experienced, that understand the retail game really well and the CPG world. And then, just work on creating a consistent experience and rolling it out with that central team in place.
I mean, my perspective on creating a consistent experience starts with the feeling, and that speaks to education. Making sure that your education of your staff is consistent. The greeting at the door, whether it's a security guard or your front desk, through to the engagement with your floor staff, our cannabis consultants, identifying what this person may be coming in for, and so that the feeling and the experience feels the same because of the people. We like to create a similar customer pathway, and that's the familiarity that I think many of us experience. Think of Starbucks. They have some different design elements today, and you'll see that Starbucks now look a little bit different in each city, but the customer pathway and the journey is generally the same, and that's what feels familiar to us. The experience, may be the same with the people, and so we lead with training, and with that education, because we don't have the luxury of dictating that we only purchase buildings that have a dimension of 30 by 50, and they're all this set box that we can make the stores look exactly the same. As cannabis retailers, we sort of take what we can get at this point. And so that creates its own unique challenges. But trying to create that similar customer journey and pathway is critical and key.
Yeah, one thought leader that I look to for this topic is Chip Connolly from Joie de Vivre Hotels. He has this concept looking at like transactional versus transformational leadership, and really talking about how it has to start from the inside in terms of your internal leadership and how you train and inspire your staff to take the experience beyond just the transaction, right? Because a lot of dispensaries that we see are just purely transactional, right? You go in there, you ask what you want to buy, they sell it to you, and it's just kind of in and out, right? But if you want to create a more transformational experience where there's layers of community, of education, of content, of social, that has to ultimately come internally from your leadership. And the people that are on the front lines of your business, your bud tenders, your staff from just top to bottom, need to have a transformational experience within the organization so that they understand how to better impact the lives of your customers. And so, it's someone that I would really encourage looking up his videos, reading his books, because he has a lot to say on this topic. And it's a little too much to go into in this session, but transformational leadership and transformational experiences start from the inside out.
My next question is about low-hanging fruit. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that either work for a retail operation or work for a brand. And sometimes when I go to conferences, it feels very theoretical, and I'm like, gosh, I sure wish I could walk out with tactics, with things I can actually apply tomorrow. And so my question is, what is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to merchandising and when it comes to strong impact on sell-through for retail owners and for brands? What tactics have you actually tried to drive sell-through that have worked that people could implement here today? And let's start with, you want to start? Marty, you want to start? Sure. Okay, great.
I mean, our at the basis of my retail strategy when it comes to the customer experience and merchandising is keep it simple. Don't add confusion to the process. Some of the biggest mistakes that I see even in my own store from time to time, is a tendency to overstock. An overstocked shelf is crowded. Crowded creates confusion. Think of it as going to maybe a discount retailer at one of these outlet malls, where everything's just thrown together and you really have to dig for the deal, or going to a place down in Union Square that is beautifully merchandised. It's simple, it's clear, and easy to follow. And so I think that those are a couple of key elements that I see as general common errors. And that's usually well-intended retail consultants gearing up for the rush, and they put as much product out on the floor. But I think ultimately what confusion will do is lead to an inaction and a decision not to buy.
Anything else?
Sure. I mean, a couple strategies that we've been using at the Guild store. Well, one thing is that we're trying to create more of a browsing experience. Here again, a lot of dispensaries that you'll see across the country are very transactional, where most of the merchandise sits behind the POS station. And our store, like a few other stores that are, that we see in the marketplace, are starting to create more of the traditional retail experience, right? All of us, when we go shopping, typically the stores that we go to, in non-cannabis stores, is there's a browsing experience, right? There's very few of us, unless you know specifically what you're looking to get at a given retail store, you generally go into a store, a mall or a retail store, and you have a browsing experience first, and you have customer service specialists helping you out on the floor, helping the discovery and exploration process. So I think having a retail layout that is conducive toward exploration and the delight that can come from that, I think is really important, especially with the new recreational customer. A lot of the ones that we see coming into the store, it's like a brave new world. They don't know what to expect. A lot of people think that cannabis is just like a joint that you smoke. And I sit there and observe people coming into the store, and their eyes are lit up when they see, oh my God, that there's edibles and topicals and sublinguals and transdermal patches and dog biscuits. And most people out there in the world do not know that cannabis exists in these forms. And it's up to the retailer. The onus is on us to be able to provide a retail experience where that discovery can take place. And as you've been hearing us say, the education piece is a big part of it, but there is a visual merchandising side of it. There is a way of laying out your retail floor where people can go through that discovery experience, through browsing, through budtender and specialist support that guides them down that path of discovery and delight. And so I would encourage people to really, if you're gonna get into retail or whatever facet that you are, even if you're behind a brand, engage with the dispensary on how you can be on the floor and creating more of that experience.
I'll
Did you have one more
add
thing?
one thing. So I
Good.
totally agree with what's been said so far. And in terms of creating that kind of visual merchandising experience, we're going to be organizing a good chunk of our store based on intents, right? So do you want to have a energizing experience, which we call Go? Then there's a whole wall where all the different products that are related to Go, you'll be able to learn about on that wall. Or do you want to equalize or relax or like there's a few different intentions that we're setting out, and just as a way to help people have that kind of self-discovery experience, while also understanding that, as was mentioned, most people that we see coming into stores, especially as we go forwards in Canada, as legalization is just happening, next week basically, they really don't know what they want. And I think it's a big mistake to assume that people will be able to self-serve. It's not like they're going to a Best Buy or a liquor store where they're familiar with all the products. They're going to need a lot more education and engagement and empowerment to allow them to make a decision they could be confident about.
I have a quick question, and I think from there I'll jump into the next one. What percentage of consumers at each of your retail locations would you say are primarily THC-driven consumers? What percentage? And then what percentage of sales? Percentage of customers versus percentage of sales?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and I think that to answer it, I would look at different product classifications.
Right, that's kind of where I'm going, yeah.
And so, most of nearly 50% of our business is flower sales. And most of the consumers coming in to purchase flowers, THC matters. They want to look for that. Conversely, edibles. We have, price-conscious consumers that want a bang for the buck in their THC. And so I would probably label that above 50% as a sweeping generalization that THC matters. And it also matters conversely to the new
other
customer
group.
coming in.
That's where I was headed.
And as
yeah.
Adam pointed out, recommending that people, you don't give somebody that, hey, this is a really great flower, but it's 22% THC, it's 28% THC. This is not for the new. Or let's go over and take a look at, and I start many new people at the vape section, because they can get titratable, reduction in THC in combinations of CBD to allow their experience to one that is not where they get blown out on their first experience and then we lose them as a customer. Or to Claudio's point, they say, yeah, smoking pot is smoking pot. It's a joint, and I still got loaded as I did in college, and I'm never going back, versus saying, gosh, if they had started with something that was predominantly CBD, that would influence. So I think there's two sides of that. Those that want that higher THC, and then many that are actually looking, saying, no, I don't need all
my
that.
question where I was headed was, when at Electric Lettuce and Sarah up in Oregon, we always are looking at UPT and APV. So how many units per transaction, an average purchase value. And we've learned that our returning customers that are THC driven usually spend more money than our new customers, but they don't come in as often. So my question is, how do you reconcile the desire to serve new customers with the very potentially, this is why I asked about the percentage of sales and percentage of customers, with the discrepancy in terms of the fact that you actually need to be revenue generating? How do you reconcile that? Does that make sense? Am I not making sense?
Yeah, no, that
Okay,
makes
good.
sense. I mean, it's a very complex market. I mean, from my few years of being on the retail forefront, we've seen a dramatic shift happening. Going back to your last question, it's like the more THC-centric customer moving now to a more CBD or low dosage or micro dosage. Like, that pendulum is swinging rapidly. But how you begin to segment your customers, it's really all over the map. We continue to see from beginning to end the segment of your customers that's very discount oriented, right? There's some customers that literally go from store to store to store looking for the very best discounts that will only respond to your text deals, right? And I don't think that segment of your customer base will ever go away, right? There's just always going to be your frugal, discount motivated customers that are just going to buy based on discounts. And if you stop offering discounts, then that loyalty goes away. Where on the other hand, there's your customers that are your connoisseur customers. There's higher tickets that come with those customers. They're the ones that are buying the more connoisseur products. And with those, I don't think those are going to go away, right? We're always going to see the connoisseur customer coming around, and they tend to spend more and they tend to buy more often, because for them, cannabis is a way of life. It's a lifestyle choice, and it's something that they choose to spend their disposable income on. And then you have this new kind of rec customer that's emerging that we're still discovering, right? I see some that are coming in that's literally, again, like a kid in a candy store, where they're like, I'll take one of these, one of those, two of those, because they're discovering. They're trying to figure out what's going to really work for them. And so we're kind of waiting to see that as that new rec customer comes in, what products are they going to hone in on? What's going to be their purchasing behavior, the frequency? And I think that that's kind of an answer that, at least for, speaking for myself, that is yet to be seen, that's yet to be determined. So we have some that there's patterns there, and some where the patterns are emerging.
Well, I would say that some of the patterns there derive directly from the fact that a lot of the brands that are out in the market today, from an aesthetic perspective, aren't doing the best possible job of conveying the right message or tone or language. So what you're seeing is brand bouncing. So as you start to see better brands emerge, you'll start to see those that were once bouncing from brand to brand start to fall in love and develop brand loyalty with the one that actually found a way to connect with them and align with their goals, vision, or objectives, right? Whatever that may be. And so you're going to start seeing that shift happen rather quickly as brands start to work with agencies like us. And ultimately, I I would just beg to say that if you guys were interested in learning more about what that process looks like, feel free to hit me up afterwards.
And the one thing I would add there is, how to find that balance, I think also depends on who your target customers are, right? So we talked about target a little earlier. We look at kind of two axes, kind of frequency of use, so curious versus very frequent, and then why are people using cannabis? So from functional benefits, like, to help people sleep or reduce pain, reduce anxiety, versus more of an experiential. And then we kind of plotted a bunch of consumer archetypes on that graph and figured out who are we building our retail experience for. And we actually honed in on one specific consumer archetype that we want to own. Like, that is how we are focusing our store build out. And then we want to over-index on...
What were the axes again? Volume?
So yeah, volume of use and then reason for use, I guess.
Okay, that's
so
good.
it's yeah. So then we figured out, there's some correlation there between, people who use a lot, maybe using it more for similar reasons than people who choose to use once a week or once a month. So we designed our store with the intention to focus on one specific archetype, and then over-index on a few others, and then fair share for the rest. So like, our stores are not built for the person who is looking for that great ratio of high THC to low price. Like, that's not who we're building our store for.
Right, and that's a nice compass and barometer for you. So when you start to see shiny objects, you think, oh, no, let's stay the course and stick it through.
When most brands think that they can be everything to everyone, and you can't.
And then they're nothing to anyone.
Right. I mean, and most people think that a brand is the aesthetic, right? It's not. The brand is the promise that you make to your customer. And so ultimately you need to find a way to serve that.
Absolutely. Anything else?
Just in terms of, you mentioned tactics earlier, and I think these are all great points if you're thinking about going into retail. And the last component of that is mine your data. Know who your customer is, who, for us, seniors spend the most. Millennials come most often. Women spend more and come less than men. Men
How did
come
you
more
mine your
and spend
data,
less.
if you don't mind my asking? If there's other people that want to learn from the data they aggregate, how could they do that?
Well, we scour the data from sales analytics from our POS system, and then we divide that by gender and age. And then we'll even look at geographics as well. What parts of the city do they come from? Us being close, closest dispensary to Marin, we get a lot of traffic coming through Marin, and it tends to be more of a mature audience. And so we look at those types of spending behaviors and patterns and frequency, and make those adjustments.
Do you base your locations? I'm sorry.
No.
Do you base your locations off of age, specific demographics?
Not at this point. We take what we can get.
I have one more question. So everybody on this panel, most people come from a vertically integrated company. And I'm curious, is that 100% positive for all of you? Or are there ways in which being vertically integrated in some ways can be a liability? I'm just curious.
So I can start quickly. Nothing in life has only upsides, right? And no downsides or no challenges. There's obvious upsides to being vertically integrated. I guess I just point out two, potential challenges. One is, I think, the bar that's set for who is going to be a effective, profitable retailer and an effective, profitable cultivator or producer of products is getting higher and higher.
Right.
So I don't think it's easy to do either one well. And I think you're going to have to do it well in order to survive long term. So, so if you want to vertically integrate, I guess my suggestion would be make sure you have the bandwidth, the resources to do both well. Don't let that kind of suffer. And the second point I'd make is around some potential legal restrictions. So we're seeing this right now in Canada. I'm from Canada. Haiku and Canopy are obviously, focused in Canada. And in some provinces, including two of the biggest provinces, there are restrictions on how many retail licenses and what kind of retail licenses licensed producers or cultivators can hold. So in BC, you can only hold up to 8 locations if you're a licensed producer, retail locations. And if you do that, you can't sell your own product. In Ontario, we just found out a week ago or so that a licensed producer can only hold one retail store authorization, and that has to be at their licensed production facility. Oh. So these laws are still evolving, and we don't know all of the finer details of the regulations yet, how they're going to define affiliate, et cetera. But there can be real restrictions on your ability to retail if you are a producer, depending on what geographies you play in.
I'd say what's pretty interesting too is, Washington State, as an example, is one of the states, in the U.S. that isn't vertically integrated. And so what you see with respect to the brands is that there are, well, quite frankly, a lot more. And a lot more that care a lot more about their aesthetic than perhaps in states that are a little less mature. When you look at vertical integration, or at least when I look at vertical integration, a lot of clients that initially come to us have the ambition of naming their brand the same as their cultivated brand is the same as their retail store, which is not the way you want to go, especially if you look to place that product in other retail stores. Because let me tell you, another retail store is not going. They'll feel like they're promoting your store. But then you got to look at the internals too and ask yourself, am I budtenders pushing my product, the one that I'm cultivating through my vertical integration license, more so than the other brands that I'm buying because I have better margins? So these are things to consider, when exploring the vertical integration space, so to speak, and making sure that you're really doing a good job of helping shed light on all of the other brands that you're selling.
I'd like to add, I would definitely agree with that statement, and we've experienced it firsthand. So the Guild family of brands have been in the marketplace for about 3 years. We've had our dispensary in San Jose for about 3 years, as well as Guild Extracts and Guild Cannabis as our extract and flower brand has been in the marketplace. And by and large, over the course of those 3 years, it's been largely beneficial in the sense that from a brand perspective, it's given us a lot of insight and a control over that front line of retail. So it's enabled us to really experiment with a lot of products, be able to really engage our customers more deeply, and just a lot of benefits along those lines. But now what we're really beginning to see is exactly what was said, is we're starting to run into conflicts in the market, where especially in the San Jose market, a lot of the nearby dispensaries don't want to carry our brands. And that's really started to hurt the brand side in the market. Now, the interesting thing with the Guild family is that, the stakeholders that we have on the dispensary operating company are different than the ones that are on the extract operating company, which are different from the ones on the cannabis operating company. I developed and managed the brand family across all those different operating companies and have to then manage potential conflicts within the different operating companies is just one whole kind of situation to talk about. But now especially I get a lot of heat on the brand side, that the folks at Guild Extracts and Guild Cannabis are saying, look, because of the store in San Jose, we can't sell to a lot of stores in that market. So I'm having to kind of really weigh on the reality of that. And really I think the determination is that we're probably going to pull back from retail as a brand family and focus more on brand.
Why not white label? Why not just launch a different name?
Well, we are starting to do that as well. For a lot of the dispensaries, that was our solution. For some of the clubs in San Jose that said, look, we love your brand, we love your products, we love you. We just don't want to promote your store. Yeah. We said, great, we have white labeling solutions for you. So lo and behold, a lot of the San Jose stores will be carrying our products under their branded store brand, right? Which is fine, but I still think that overall, what was in theory, I think a good idea to be vertically integrated from truly seed to sale. I think in practice has turned out that what I would advise is if you're going to go on the brand side, go on the brand side. If you're going to go on the retail side, go on the retail side. If you try to do both, you're going to run into some of the pitfalls I think that you're hearing here. And we as a brand family, I think, are now going to be pulling back from retail and really focusing more on brand.
And if you're going to be vertically integrated and push your products more than the others that perhaps you're purchasing from other cultivators, differentiate your brands from one another so that you're not trying to be everything to everyone, as I mentioned earlier. Give them some differentiation. Everyone has different personalities, different likes and wants, and so it's good to span that across a bunch of different archetypes or personalities.
I share, well, as Harvest, we're straight retailers, right? No ambitions to cultivate or manufacture products. And I think that it's very common in a nascent industry of people and companies trying to do many things. And certainly in the cannabis industry, there's a lot of shiny lures in the water. And there are very few people that do it well. And I think that Guild is one of them. It has a really terrific product that we carry. And would I carry it if we were in San Jose? We'd probably be having that conversation that he just mentioned, right? Because there are inherent conflicts and risks. But aside from that, and if you're thinking about getting into the space, or if you are a retailer and your friends brought you a grow, consider the dilutive aspect of your efficacy in the marketplace. As a mentor of mine said to me once, he said, Marty, you can do many things and be average at them. You can focus on one thing and trying to be the best. You can do two and be pretty darn good. After that, you're probably just going to be an average player in whatever space that you're playing. And that's always stuck with me, is specialization. And so I think that's the reason for us to focus on one thing, and that's being a great retailer and having great vendor partners like Guild do the heavy lifting in their departments and not trying to go after those at the idea that I'm going to reduce margins. And look, I've seen profit and losses from vertically integrated operations, and it's very attractive, and that's part of what's very appealing. For us, we want to grow and become a retailer and develop relationships to where our price margins are somewhat negligible for the headache of trying to be a manufacturer or cultivator, because those are really difficult areas of the business.
That's wonderful. This has been great. So I think a lot of the different companies that I talk to are struggling with a lot of the same things that you are. I think we have how many minutes? We have 5 minutes. So I wanted to, the last 5 minutes, open it up to questions. Is there anyone here who has a question for a panelist? I'll start over here.
Well, I mean, I would just say that, looking at, I guess, maybe MedMen as an example, because I think that's kind of where you're going, but, technology exists to make our lives easier. And so when you look at, even just building a website, you look at the user experience and you look at the user interface, we want to see and feel something that we're attracted to and gravitate towards. And so while those stores are designed for a very specific archetype, like Haiku's brands, Tokyo Smoke, you have to realize that there are also things that cultivators can do with those retailers to create opportunities to give consumer education, which I think is also what you're leaning towards. So some of the things that we've done are virtual reality farm tours. We recognize that farms are pretty far away from most often the stores that we work with. And so how can we give those consumers and patients the ability to experience the farm and get a little bit more education with respect to the process. While most consumers don't care about the process of how cannabis is cultivated, most often than not, it's sometimes a little bit more fun to show them through an experience that is tailored to and towards the store that you're looking to develop that relationship with.
Anyone else?
I mean, to answer your question, I sit on both sides of that fence. We get inundated with, hey, can you put this flyer and this postcard and this? And my general response and answer is no. I think that we want to support our vendors, but we do it in a different way. It may be a special promotion, it may be a shelf talker that runs for a period of time, but encouraging our brands to create shop in shops. And some of our most prominent brands have, permanent displays or semi-permanent displays for a period of time in our stores. Because consumer and human nature is one of which we like familiarity, right? We like certainty, but we also like a little bit of uncertainty. And so you got to keep it fresh while not, if I go back to my previous statement of my mantra, is keeping it simple for the customer.
I think there were some other questions. Did you want to go next?
Hi guys, my name is Bryce. Run a cannabis delivery service.
That's a great question, but it's also, I think, too vague to answer in full. I'd be happy to share something with you afterwards that would run you through a process, but great question.
Well,
Go ahead, you can, yeah.
well, I mean, one good model to look at as exemplary kind of company in the industry is Ease, as far as their scale, right? I mean, they've got a delivery platform that spans statewide. We've carried our brands on their platform, and the way that they're really looking at it, they're focusing on driving the Ease brand first and foremost, right? So from the consumer perspective, the entire user experience is very Ease centric, right? But then I think that pendulum is swinging for them internally now. They're realizing that they really got to focus on the brand, because ultimately the customer wants to develop the relationship with the brand. The delivery service is just the delivery system or the means by which the brand or the product gets into the customer's hands. And so I think what you're going to be seeing with Ease, and I think a lot of other delivery services, a little bit more emphasis on the brand and developing that brand story and narrative and experience that we've been talking about, bringing that to the forefront of that experience and letting the brand of the delivery service itself recede. Because unlike a brick and mortar store, there's not a lot of, a high touch point with a delivery service. It shows up, it gives you what you need, and it's on its way. Whereas at a dispensary, you have the opportunity, like Marty's store, to create a community. You can create a browsing experience. You can really go into a lot of depth there that you can with a delivery service.
I think we have time for one more. Let's do two more questions. Let's do here, and then we'll go to the back.
As a manufacturer, what can we do to help the stores more? We have 90% attrition rate in our marketplace, but we find that a lot of the assets that we develop, merchandising, retailing, the stores aren't interested in. You mentioned a store-in-store. It's very hard to find retailers that really want to invest the time into creating that co-branded experience. We offer that regularly. So my question is, what can I as a manufacturer do to create assets and to support the in-store experience around my products?
One thing that we just did that I actually was extremely surprised that it didn't exist, but the hang hooks that you hold your product on? Well, oftentimes at the end of one, you'll see just a little plastic piece that just inserts on the top and has a little piece of paper you can slide in that you could perhaps, have a little description on there. You see it all the time, but there's never really been a device that actually mounts onto the end of a hang hook that has any kind of LED display or anything that gravitates your eyes towards, the product on the shelf, given the fact it sits there in a sea of sameness. I mean, when you look at a lot of the products next to each other, they all kind of start to blend in, especially when there are those stores that just throw shit on the wall. That said, there are ways for you to stand out, and you can do so by, adding, devices in or being a little bit more creative with respect to how you present your product.
I'll chime in on this really quick. So I actually work for a producer, and I do exactly what you do all the time. And one thing that I often do is I will call the store, and I'm sure you do this already, but I'll say, hey, how's your sell-through going? Oh, and you know what? Nobody does that. Nobody calls like a couple weeks later, a couple weeks later, a couple weeks later. Oh, what products are moving? Oh, what products aren't moving? Oh, what can I do to drive that sell-through for you? Oh, just even asking them, it talks a lot. It harkens back to a lot of what the other people on the panel talked about. It's the people and it's the relationships that you form. Not that that automatically drives sell-through, but sometimes just being the squeaky wheel does work wonders.
One thing I would just add quickly, the more that you can find a way to build a loyal following that clearly really wants your product, and you're doing the marketing yourself to build that community, the more likely a retailer will be to say, yeah, we'll give you a shop and shop for 150 square feet, and here's what the terms will be. I know that's what we look for very much so is, it's one thing to have a shiny brand or a product that works well, but who are your customers? How much do they love you? How much do they talk about you? And the more you can show a retailer that you have that real loyal following, I think the more likely a retailer will be to give you that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, and I would say one more thing just before we end this. And this works for some, doesn't work for all, but as a way of increasing your sell-through rate with respect to the product that is, I would say, a little bit more economically priced. If you came out with something that was a lot more high-end but only offered a limited run of that, you could basically say to the retailer, hey, look, I will reserve X amount of our limited stuff if you purchase, X amount of our economically priced stuff.
Bundling.
So
Yeah.
that is bundling. It's a great way to encourage, your retailers to purchase more and more frequently, for that matter.
I think that we are out of time. Oh, wait, one more question. We'll do one more, and then we're out of time. Seasonable. So it's seasonal usually. Prices go up and down, not just based on THC, but they go up and down based on time of year too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I fully got the question, but absolutely. I mean, pricing does fluctuate by season, and I think because potency has been the name of the game historically, that definitely the more potent the flower, usually that could command a higher price. But what we're seeing now is again, this is the age of brand. And so we're starting to work with a lot of flower brands that the brand itself, because they've done a great job of brand development and brand engagement and social and all those different layers we've talked about, where because the brand has a following, they can then go to the store and command a higher price because they're actually helping the store with customer acquisition. And that's really important. If you have a brand that you can then sell to the store that value, that I am gonna bring my following to your store and bring you new customers, like I will pay twice as much for that product, and I will sell it for a premium if you have that power to command customer acquisition.
That's exactly. On that note, thank you for coming. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.